There is a specific agonizing silence that haunts millions of homes every single night. It is the heavy, suffocating silence of two human beings lying side by side in the exact same bed, breathing the exact same air, yet separated by a vast, freezing ocean of neurological distance. You sit across from them at the dining table, looking into the eyes of the person you once considered your ultimate safe harbor. But now, you only feel a profound, exhausting loneliness. You ask yourself how love, something that started with such blinding magnetic intensity, a connection that felt like destiny, can slowly rot into such bitter resentment. You wonder why the simple sound of their key turning in the front door now causes a subtle spike of tension in your chest. But the sovereign mind must look at this tragedy through the cold, unforgiving lens of human biology. Your relationship is not failing simply because you have fallen out of love or because you are inherently flawed. It is failing because you are unconsciously breaking fundamental laws of human neurobiology and energetic physics. Without even realizing it, you have conditioned your nervous system and theirs to read each other not as a sanctuary, but as a predator. Your amygdala is engaged in a daily, invisible war of survival inside your own living room. Today, we will dismantle the architecture of this silent collapse. We will reveal the 5 lethal mistakes that silently erode the foundation of any human connection. Pay absolute, undivided attention to the discourse today, because the 5th mistake on this list is the definitive fatal error. The number 1 mistake that instantly and irreversibly destroys a relationship at the molecular level. It is the final threshold where 90% of couples shatter, trapping themselves in a cycle of endless pain because they never saw the final blow coming. If you are ready to drop the illusion and see the absolute truth of connection, walk with me now. To understand how a magnificent union collapses into ruin, we must first examine the subtle, invisible collision of energies that happens daily in your interactions. The destruction of a bond is rarely a sudden explosion. It is the slow, agonizing drip of water that eventually cracks the stone. We must step into the first phase of this collapse. In ancient Daoist philosophy, the entire universe, including the intricate dance of human relationships, is governed by the eternal interaction of Yin and Yang. Yin is the water, fluid, emotional, deep, intuitive, and feeling. Yang is the stone, rigid, structured, logical, protective, and problem-solving. In any profound dynamic, regardless of the physical gender of the partners, these two energies must harmonize. But here lies the first lethal mistake, the fixer's illusion. When the yin energy is highly distressed, when a partner comes to you carrying the heavy, chaotic water of a difficult day, of feeling overwhelmed, or of navigating a deep sadness, they are not asking for a blueprint. They are seeking a container. They are seeking the safe shores of your presence to let the chaotic water flow, settle, and find its own peace. But the yang energy, driven by a deep, primitive biological desire to protect, provide, and resolve, immediately tries to throw rigid stones into the rushing water. You offer cold logic. You offer a meticulous, step-by-step solution. You attempt to fix their emotional state as if they were a broken machine on an assembly line. When they say they are exhausted by their circumstances, you immediately tell them how to change their schedule. This creates a catastrophic neurological mismatch. The partner seeking connection feels utterly dismissed, unheard, and emotionally abandoned. They feel that their pain is an inconvenience that you are trying to quickly manage and sweep away. Conversely, the partner offering the solutions feels unappreciated, rejected, and deeply frustrated that their genuine attempt to protect was met with anger. You are speaking two completely different biological languages. The water crashes violently against the rigid stone, and over time, the stone erodes and the water becomes toxic. True mastery in a relationship is understanding the profound martial art of presence. You do not stop a rushing river by throwing a single rock into it. You calm the river by becoming the wide, silent, accommodating banks. A wounded heart does not need a mechanic, it needs a witness. But the friction of this misunderstanding is merely the surface layer of the collapse. When communication fundamentally breaks down, the human ego steps in to protect itself from the pain of disconnection, leading us directly into a much darker, more violent territory. This brings us to the second lethal mistake, the ledger of pain. True intimacy is the ultimate act of biological and psychological surrender. When you open your soul to another human being, you are handing them the sacred map to all your hidden scars, your deepest insecurities, and your unresolved childhood traumas. You voluntarily take off your heavy iron armor, exposing your softest, most vulnerable flesh, trusting entirely that the person standing before you will hold their sword to protect you from the world, and never to strike you. But what happens when the tension rises? In the intense heat of an argument, when your primitive brain feels threatened, the ego reaches blindly in the dark for the deadliest weapon available to regain control. And in a moment of reactive anger, you weaponize their memory. You pull a trauma from their past, a delicate secret they entrusted to you in a moment of pure, weeping vulnerability, and you hurl it at them like a poisoned spear just to win a trivial debate. You bring up past mistakes that were supposedly forgiven and buried years ago. You keep a meticulous, dark accounting book, a ledger of every single time they failed, every time they fell short, and every time they hurt you. And you present this ledger as evidence in the courtroom of your rage. In the realm of neuroscience, this act does not merely hurt their feelings, it fundamentally rewires their brain's perception of safety. When you use their vulnerability as ammunition, their central nervous system registers a profound, primal betrayal. The primitive brain instantly logs the interaction with a devastating warning code. This person is not safe. The very information I gave them for my healing is actively being used for my destruction. The heavy iron armor immediately goes back on, and this time it is forged 10 times thicker. They may stay in the house, they may continue to sleep in the same bed, they may even smile at the dinner table the next day. But their soul has completely evacuated the premises. You won the argument, but you murdered the trust. You scored a point for your ego, but you burned the entire empire to the ground. A relationship can survive financial ruin, physical distance, and external tragedy, but it cannot survive the internal betrayal of weaponized vulnerability. When the armor goes on, the warmth of the connection begins to freeze. The ecosystem of the relationship shifts from a thriving garden into a cold, barren wasteland, where both partners are simply trying to survive the winter. This leads us into the darkest valleys of human separation. We must examine what happens when the fighting stops and the terrifying silence begins. We must face the third lethal mistake and navigate the barren landscape of the silent retreat. You have fired the poisoned spear. The ledger of pain has been read aloud. The vulnerabilities have been weaponized, and the heavy iron armor has been locked into place. The violent storm of the argument reaches its absolute breaking point, and then, suddenly, the screaming stops. The room falls quiet. One partner turns their back, walks away, and a heavy, suffocating silence descends upon the house. Many people falsely believe that when the shouting ends, the war is over. The amateur mind perceives this quietness as a necessary peace, a break from the chaos, a moment for the dust to settle. But the sovereign observer understands a far more terrifying reality. The silence is not the end of the war. The silence is the beginning of the siege. This brings us to the third lethal mistake, the silent retreat, scientifically known as stonewalling. To comprehend the sheer devastation of the silent treatment, we must strip away the psychology of the ego and examine the raw, primitive wiring of the human brain. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, if a human being was ignored, ostracized, or cast out by their tribe, it was not merely an emotional inconvenience. It was a literal death sentence. A solitary human could not survive the freezing winter, the wild predators, or the starvation of the wilderness alone. Therefore, evolution wired our neurobiology to perceive social rejection and isolation as an absolute immediate threat to our physical survival. When you cross your arms, stare blankly at the wall, and refuse to acknowledge the existence of your partner, You are not simply taking a break from the conversation. You are executing a biological assault. Modern neuroscience has mapped this exact phenomenon using functional MRI scans. When a human being experiences the silent treatment, the brain activates the anterior cingulate cortex, the exact same neural pathway that processes acute physical injury. If you were to walk up to your partner and strike them across the face, their brain would light up in the exact same coordinates as it does when you look right through them and refuse to speak. The silent retreat is not a passive act. It is the infliction of invisible, agonizing trauma. You are emotionally starving them to death. We must look closely at the terrifying dynamic this creates between the two entities in the room. Let us first examine the partner who is executing the silence, the withdrawer. In many cases, the stonewaller is not operating out of calculated psychopathic malice. They retreat because their own nervous system has become completely flooded. Their heart rate has exceeded 100 beats per minute. Their blood is saturated with cortisol, and they are experiencing a state of diffuse physiological arousal. The internal circuits are overloaded, and to prevent a complete psychological collapse, their primitive brain pulls the emergency lever. They shut down the system. They pull up the massive wooden drawbridge of their fortress, lock the iron gates, and retreat into the dark, silent chambers of their own mind, just to survive the emotional overwhelm. But here is the devastating, tragic cost of that survival mechanism. By pulling up the drawbridge to protect your own internal peace, you have locked the person you love outside in a lethal blizzard. Now, we must look at the partner who is left outside in the cold, the pursuer. When the stonewaller goes silent, the pursuer's amygdala instantly hijacks their brain. They are suddenly plunged into a state of acute biological panic. The person who is supposed to be their safe harbor has just become a phantom. They are living with a ghost. They speak, and their words fall into an empty void. They cry, and there is absolutely no reflection of their pain in the other person's eyes. This is the exact coordinate where the pursuer will often escalate their behavior, sometimes appearing frantic, illogical, or overly demanding. They will send 30 text messages in a row. They will follow the stonewaller from room to room, begging for a response, crying, or even shouting. The stonewaller looks at this frantic behavior and feels justified in their silence, labeling the pursuer as crazy, unstable, or too dramatic. But the sovereign mind knows that the pursuer is not crazy. They are fighting for their biological life. Their nervous system genuinely believes it has been abandoned in the freezing wilderness to die. They are frantically banging their bloody fists against the heavy wooden drawbridge of the fortress, begging to be let back inside where it is warm. They are not fighting to win the argument anymore. They are simply begging for proof that they still exist in your eyes. Consider the profound, ancient power of the winter frost. When a massive oak tree senses that the winter is too harsh, it performs a ruthless biological calculation. To preserve the vital core of the trunk, the tree cuts off the flow of sap and nutrients to its outer branches. It saves itself, but the abandoned branches freeze, wither, become brittle, and eventually snap off entirely in the wind, falling dead to the cold earth. When you execute the silent retreat, you are the tree cutting off the vital sap of communication. You may preserve your own temporary peace. You may protect your own ego from the discomfort of the conflict, but you are slowly murdering the branches of your relationship. You cannot strangle the airflow of a union for days and then be surprised when the connection suffocates and dies. True mastery of the emotional realm requires a profound behavioral shift. The master does not stonewall. The master takes a tactical pause. When the master feels their nervous system flooding, when the cortisol spikes and the urge to retreat becomes overwhelming, they do not simply vanish into the void. They maintain the lifeline. They look their partner directly in the eyes and deliver a clear, anchoring statement. My mind is completely overwhelmed right now. I cannot give you the peace or the logic this conversation deserves. I need 30 minutes to calm my physical body. I'm not abandoning you. I love you, and I will return to resolve this. By issuing the tactical pause, You step away to regulate your biology, but you leave a warm, glowing lantern on the porch. You signal to your partner's nervous system that the fortress is temporarily closed for repairs, but they are not being banished to the wolves. The biological panic is immediately neutralized. But what happens when the lantern is never lit? What happens when the silence becomes the permanent, daily weather of the house? When the relationship is starved of its vital energy, a terrifying vacuum is created in the center of the dynamic. And the fundamental law of physics dictates that human nature abhors a vacuum. When two people feel completely empty, exhausted, and abandoned, they do not simply accept the starvation. They begin to desperately seek a source of nourishment. They turn their gaze toward each other, not with the intention of giving love, but with the dark, heavy intention of extracting survival. This introduces the next phase of the collapse. We must step out of the freezing blizzard of silence, and we must walk into the heavy, suffocating darkness of emotional extraction. This brings us to the fourth lethal mistake, the absolute distortion of the romantic ideal. We must confront the ghost that haunts the empty halls of your union. We must face the agonizing reality of the parasitic projection. You have survived the freezing blizzard of the silent retreat. You have witnessed the devastating cost of pulling up the drawbridge and starving the connection of its vital oxygen. But when a human being is deprived of emotional nourishment for an extended period, they do not simply accept their own demise with grace. They enter a state of desperate, terrifying psychological starvation. They begin to look at the person across the room not as a sovereign partner with whom to build a generational empire, but as a biological resource to be consumed. The dynamic shifts from a mutual alliance into a frantic, subconscious extraction. This brings us to the fourth lethal mistake, the parasitic projection. To fully comprehend the danger of this error, we must first brutally assassinate the most romanticized, highly celebrated neuro-linguistic poison of modern society. From the time you were a very young child, your subconscious mind was systematically fed a catastrophic lie. You were told that one day you would wander the earth and finally find your other half. You were indoctrinated by the devastating cultural narrative of "you complete me." The sovereign mind must look at this concept with absolute disgust. This is not romance. This is not the foundation of a magnificent love story. This is the exact psychological architecture of a hostage situation. The parasitic projection occurs when you enter a profound dynamic, expecting another human being to fill the dark, gaping voids left behind by your childhood, your absent parents, or your unresolved bleeding traumas. You bring your deepest psychological wounds to the sacred altar of the relationship, and you silently demand that your partner become your ultimate savior, your unpaid therapist, your sole source of dopamine, and your emotional pacifier. You do not see them for the complex, flawed human being they actually are. You merely project the phantom of your unmet needs directly onto their face. Look at this exact dynamic through the cold, surgical lens of behavioral psychology and neurobiology. If you lack the internal machinery to generate your own joy, your own self-validation, and your own autonomic emotional regulation, you will inevitably attempt to outsource that massive biological labor to your partner. When you feel a spike of anxiety, you demand that they immediately soothe your nervous system. When you feel hollow and empty, you demand that they entertain you. When you feel insecure, you demand that they constantly pour external validation into a bucket that has no bottom. You are using their vital chi to regulate your own broken machinery. Imagine two severely dehydrated travelers crawling through a scorching, unforgiving, barren desert. They have been walking for days without a single drop of moisture. Finally, they find each other in the vast, blinding emptiness. They both fall to their knees, hold out their cups, and desperately beg the other for water. But both cups are completely dry. The first traveler screams in agony. "If you truly loved me, you would pour water into my cup to save my life." The second traveler weeps in despair. "How can I possibly pour for you when I am dying of thirst myself?" They end up fighting, tearing at each other's flesh, completely hating each other for a physical and biological impossibility. You simply cannot extract water from a dry well. When you cast your partner in the heavy, suffocating role of your savior, you place an agonizing, crushing weight upon their central nervous system. A human being was designed by millions of years of evolution to be a partner, a lover, and a co-architect of reality. They were absolutely never designed to be the foundational pillar holding up the collapsing roof of your mental health. Eventually, the structural integrity of the host will fail. They will begin to feel suffocated, chronically exhausted, and deeply resentful. They will look at you and realize a terrifying truth. They are not being loved for who they are. They are being consumed for what they can provide. They are being used as human life support. Consider the strangler fig, a magnificent but utterly lethal parasitic vine found in the deep, ancient jungles. The strangler fig does not grow strong, independent roots deep into the earth. Instead, it wraps its tendrils entirely around a massive sovereign host tree. It climbs the solid trunk, feeding off the tree's hard-earned nutrients, using the host's immense strength to reach the sunlight at the canopy. From a distance, for a brief period, they look like one beautiful intertwined organism. But eventually, the vine wraps so tightly and extracts so much energy that it completely cuts off the host's biological circulation. The magnificent host tree slowly rots and dies inside the suffocating grip of the vine. And when the host trunk finally collapses into dust, the parasitic vine comes crashing down with it, destroying them both in the dirt. A truly sovereign connection, operating on the highest, impenetrable frequency, is never built on the fragile, toxic foundation of "you complete me." It is built on the absolute, unshakable law of two complete wholes. True love is not two starving beggars violently demanding water from each other in the desert. True love is two sovereign individuals who have walked to the dark river entirely alone, who have faced their own shadows, who have mastered the brutal art of drawing their own water, and who come together at the table with cups that are already overflowing. You do not drink from each other. You share the magnificent overflow. You do not need them to survive your reality. You actively choose them to multiply the beauty of your existence. When a relationship survives the devastating friction of the fixer's illusion, avoids the lethal weaponization of the ledger of pain, refuses the starvation of the silent retreat, and breaks the heavy iron chains of the parasitic projection, it has achieved a highly elite, magnificent level of structural integrity. It has become a fortress capable of weathering almost any external storm the world can throw at it. But the sovereign mind must remain forever vigilant. Even the most magnificent, heavily armored fortress in the world can be brought to its knees by a single, undetected drop of poison introduced directly into the royal water supply. We have navigated the dangerous outer rings of the battlefield, but now we must cross the final, most terrifying threshold of human interaction. We must confront the absolute apex predator of romantic connection. This is the mistake that does not merely weaken the bond over time, it executes the relationship instantly at the molecular level. It is the silent, grinning assassin that creeps into the dining room masquerading as a harmless joke, a subtle sigh, or a momentary rolling of the eyes. This is the exact, precise coordinate where 90% of all ruined relationships officially sign their own death warrant, often years before they ever physically separate or pack their bags. You can survive explosive anger. You can survive profound sadness. You can even survive long, agonizing periods of physical and emotional distance. But the human biological nervous system cannot survive the introduction of this one specific, lethal neurochemical compound. We must step into the darkest, most arrogant chamber of the human ego. We must confront the number one mistake that destroys any relationship instantly, leaving absolutely nothing but ashes in its wake. We must face the betrayal of the harbor. You have navigated the treacherous waters of the first 4 lethal mistakes. You have witnessed the catastrophic friction of the fixer's illusion. You have seen the lethal weaponization of the ledger of pain. You have survived the freezing blizzard of the silent retreat. and you have broken the heavy iron chains of the parasitic projection. A union that survives these 4 trials is a magnificent, resilient fortress.
But even the most impenetrable fortress, with walls forged of thick iron and deep stone, can be entirely brought to its knees from the inside by a single microscopic drop of undetectable poison in the royal water supply. This brings us to the ultimate executioner of love, the absolute apex predator of human connection. The number one mistake that destroys any relationship instantly, leaving absolutely nothing but cold ashes and ghosts in its wake.
We must step into the 5th error, the betrayal of the harbor and the lethal, silent poison of contempt. To understand the absolute devastation of contempt, we must clearly separate it from anger. Anger, while chaotic and uncomfortable, is an emotion of equality. When you are angry with your partner, you are standing on the exact same horizontal plane as them. Anger fundamentally means, I care about this dynamic, I am frustrated, and I want you to change. Anger still possesses a pulse. It still holds the desperate kinetic energy of hope. Contempt is an entirely different biological mechanism. Contempt is not an emotion of equality, it is a declaration of absolute superiority. It is the physical manifestation of disgust. Contempt is the subtle rolling of the eyes when your partner speaks. It is the heavy, sarcastic sigh when they express a vulnerability. It is the mocking tone, the cruel irony, the condescending smirk, and the subtle implication that they are fundamentally incompetent, foolish, or beneath you. When you introduce contempt into the dynamic, you are no longer communicating with a partner. You have placed yourself on a towering psychological pedestal, and you are looking down at an inferior subject. Let us examine this execution through the unforgiving laws of neurobiology and human survival. When a human being is subjected to contempt from the person they love, their brain does not register it as a simple disagreement. The amygdala processes the sneer of contempt as a literal threat of biological exile. In the primitive mind, to be looked upon with disgust by your tribe. Leader means you are about to be cast out into the wilderness to die. Clinical neuroscience reveals a terrifying truth about this specific behavior. When a partner is regularly subjected to contempt, their immune system literally begins to degrade. Their body stops fighting off illness, their blood is chronically saturated with cortisol, and their nervous system goes into a permanent, exhausting state of hypervigilance. You are not just hurting their feelings. Your arrogance is biologically destroying their physical vessel. We must visualize this through the ultimate metaphor of the sovereign union, the safe harbor. The external world is a brutal, chaotic, and completely unforgiving ocean. Every single time your partner walks out the front door, they are stepping onto a battlefield. They face the ruthless demands of society, the heavy burden of provision, the chaotic storms of the workplace, and the endless, exhausting noise of a society that demands perfection. They are constantly holding up a heavy iron shield just to survive the raging waters of existence. The relationship, the home, is supposed to be the harbor. It is the one sacred, protected coordinate on the map where the ship can finally drop its anchor. It is the one place where they can lower the heavy iron shield, take off the rusted armor, and expose their exhausted, vulnerable flesh, knowing they are entirely safe from the storm. But when you introduce contempt into the home, you commit the ultimate betrayal. You are standing on the lighthouse of the safe harbor, manning a heavy cannon and firing directly into the hull of their ship, the exact moment they come in to rest. You have made the sanctuary more dangerous than the storm outside. The exact fraction of a second you make your partner feel neurologically unsafe inside their own home, the relationship dies. The biological trust is severed. The bodies may continue to occupy the same house, they may share the same bank accounts, and they may sit at the same dinner table for decades. But the union is officially a ghost ship floating in dead water. This betrayal is a silent epidemic that ravages both the masculine and the feminine energies in profoundly devastating ways. For the masculine energy, the structure, the provider, there is no wound more lethal than feeling perpetually inadequate. When a man exhausts his vital life force trying to build, provide, and protect, only to return to a harbor where his efforts are mocked, his competence is questioned, and his leadership is met with a condescending sneer. His spirit is entirely crushed. He will slowly retreat into silence, burying his soul in his work or his distractions, because his biological imperative to be the hero has been laughed at by the exact person he wanted to save. For the feminine energy, the flow, the heart, the emotional core, there is no pain more agonizing than feeling entirely invisible and dismissed. When a woman pours her deep, intuitive water into the relationship, attempting to nurture the profound emotional bond of the home, only to be met with cold, sarcastic logic, or to have her feelings mocked as dramatic and crazy, her heart violently closes. She realizes her sacred water is being poured onto frozen, barren concrete. She will slowly build an impenetrable wall of ice around her chest, starving the dynamic of its warmth, because her profound vulnerability was treated with arrogance. I know the exact, crushing weight of this failure. I know the profound, agonizing exhaustion of lying awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, wondering where the magnificent magic of the beginning went. I know the heavy, silent tears that you have shed in the shower so no one could hear you. I know the quiet, lonely drives home, gripping the steering wheel, dreading the moment you have to turn the key in the lock, because the house no longer feels like a home. It feels like a tribunal. You have poured the absolute best parts of your biological and spiritual capacity into a vessel that was shattered at the base. You have blamed yourself, wondering if you were simply unlovable or if you were fundamentally broken. You must look at me and hear this truth. You did not fail because you lacked love. You did not fail because you are defective. You failed because you were navigating the most dangerous, volatile biological minefield in the human experience, and you were completely blinded by the illusions of society. You were trying to build a generational empire without a map, using toxic tools that were destined to collapse the foundation. You have suffered enough in the dark. The era of the blind, toxic collision is dead. You have learned the devastating friction of the fixer, the cruelty of the ledger, the starvation of the silence, and the heavy chains of the parasite. And you have faced the ultimate assassin, the arrogant, lethal poison of the betrayed harbor. You are no longer a victim of invisible forces. You are the architect of your own energetic sovereignty. So, I leave you with one final visceral reality to confront as the screen fades to black and you return to the heavy reality of your life. Tomorrow, when the sun rises and the brutal, chaotic world begins to rage once again. When the heavy storm arrives at your front door and your partner looks at you with exhausted, battle-weary eyes, who exactly is the entity standing in the hallway? Will your partner find an impenetrable, warm shield against the cruelty of the world? Or will you unleash the arrogant sneer of your own ego and become the very storm that destroys them from the inside out? The choice is yours. The path is open. Amituofo.